Woohoo! Welcome! Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's lesson. We are going to cover economic systems today. And you may be familiar with different types of economic systems because last semester you probably learned about different types of government, and many types of government have economic systems that come with them. They're kind of a package deal. That's like communism, socialism, those tend to have a lot of economic things already built in. So they're kind of governments and economic systems together. So you might know something about these. So, what is an economic system exactly? Well, I like to think of it as the set of blueprints for an economy. So, like the laws that govern how people can buy and sell, who can own property, who can't own property, what does the government have to do, what do individual citizens have to do. Well, many different countries have answered this question in many different ways over time. The most famous, of course, is the Cold War clashes between capitalism and communism, or command economies and free market economies. And that was the most famous showdown between types of economies of the last 100 years. So just to review what economics is, it's a branch of social sciences, we call it. It's a kind of social studies, and it concerns how societies distribute their resources to satisfy people's needs and wants. And remember, we talked about scarcity last time, and you've talked about opportunity cost before. So more simply, it's how do humans decide to spend their time and their resources? Well, this is what role does the government play in that? We can't just up and take each other's stuff because we have laws against it. And so the government has a role in the economy. So the essential questions I want you to keep in mind are who decides how resources are distributed and what is the role of government in the economy? So here's a scenario. I want you to imagine that this whole class is going to get the same grade no matter what. Whatever the class average is will be awarded to everybody. So if you work very hard, you will help bring up that average. But if you laze around, you'll bring down the overall average and therefore your grade. So would you vote for this scenario? And I want you to share in this week's discussion. This is your economic mystery of the week that's been embedded in this video. So I'm going to give you some keys to think about before you respond, and I'll be looking for those in your response. Okay, so there are several different kinds of economies, and I'm going to talk about which one this is in a moment. So every economy began with a traditional economy. Before there were formal governments and before there were nations, people just sort of lived off the land however they could. And how they distributed things was according to tradition. Let me give you an example. These are the Sami. They are reindeer hoarders. Hoarders? Oh my gosh, no, they're herders. Reindeer hoarders. Might as well be. They live north of the Arctic Circle. And they're based on reindeer herding and hunting. And they're pretty amazing. So they are involved directly with the land. The herders distribute their meat within their families, the reindeer milk within their families, the reindeer skins within their families. There's no government telling them how to divide up the reindeer. So in this circumstance, the government is not involved. So there are economies, and for most of history, the government was not involved in the economy much at all. Today, there are a few economies like this, not very many. There are a couple of videos and things in here. I'll post the videos and resources if you're interested in the Sami. They're pretty cool. You can just Google them. However, when governments did get involved, the main way was in market-dominant economies. So we think of market as a marketplace, somewhere we go to get food, grocery market, perhaps a mall, perhaps like a bazaar with little stands selling fruit and jewelry, like a farmer's market. But market actually just means anywhere that people are buying and selling. So in a market economy, we often call it a, quote, free market economy. Individuals make the decisions about where to invest their money, where to work, how to spend their money, and if they own a business, what to produce. Okay? So buyers and sellers sort of decide for themselves. In this kind of economy, most resources and businesses are controlled by private citizens. That means by people like you and I. The government does not make most of the decisions. Everyday people make most of the decisions. Okay, so we call it, you'll often hear that the United States is a free market economy. We're actually market dominant economy because the government does control some aspects of our civilization, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. This is one of them, though. School is something the government controls. School is not a free market where schools compete to have you come to them and you have to pay them to educate you. That's controlled by the government. So the United States is market dominant. Great Britain is market dominant. Hong Kong, mostly Japan. So these are countries where they really prioritize the decisions of private folks. So the government's not going to tell you where to work when you grow up. You're going to decide where to work. Okay, so let's talk about the supposed opposite, a command-dominant economy. So the most famous example of this was the Soviet Union in Russia, where they had communism. However, it doesn't just have to be communism. Fascism is the same. So they also control the government. The Nazis under Hitler in Germany controlled most aspects of the economy. Right? So it does not have to be communism. It can be several other kinds. North Korea is fascist, and they control most aspects of life, and certainly where people work, what they eat, what they produce. So in this system, the government, rather than the free market, determines what goods should be produced. So instead of the owner of the car dealership saying, hey, I need to order 15 Jeeps to sell, the government says, hey, I think people need to drive Jeeps this year. We're going to have the factories produce Jeeps. Right? The government also decides how many Jeeps to produce and what price the Jeeps will be offered. And the command economy is a really important feature of any communist society. An example I love to use for Soviet Russia was the Gosplan. And the Gosplan was a 50,000 page, 500,000 page, anyway, a huge document that would fill up a classroom. And it told every factory what to produce that year. The problem was that they could not predict how many coats they were going to need because they wouldn't know how many coats people were going to run out of. They didn't know how many baby carriages to produce because they didn't know how many babies would be born that year. The same is true of a company in the United States that produces baby carriages. But that company will probably try to make sure that it makes more than enough, and it will do a lot of research to try and figure out how many babies were born. Okay? Whereas the government had to make the decisions for so many different factories and so many different industries that it was just too much. So there were a lot of shortages and there were a lot of surpluses. One of the famous examples that was used in propaganda that was trying to make communists look bad was that there were, one year the Soviet Union produced twice as many right shoes as left shoes, and that caused a huge problem. Well, a company can make the same mistake, a private company in the United States. What will happen? Oh, they might go out of business. But the government isn't going to go out of business. And so in a communist society, the idea is that the government deals with all the problems. The government also causes all the problems. So those are the sort of two sides of the coin. In the real world, most economies are mixed. Government provides many services for the people, but individual buyers, sellers, and companies dictate most prices. Okay, so the U.S. economy, in case you're wondering, we're about 2/3 free market, so privately owned, private citizens do business in our economy, and then about 1/3 government controlled. That third involves things like schools. So my salary is paid largely by the state of Colorado, which is the government. Roads, highways, so the interstate system is funded by the federal government and the states. And finally, the military. Now, I want you to imagine what it would be like if you had to go out and every single person had to find the money for private school. It would be a very different world. What would it be like if you had to hire someone to build a road anytime you wanted to go somewhere, or had to pay whoever built the road in the first place? Imagine you're going up to Estes Park or going out to DIA. You would have to stop and pay a toll for that road. Hopefully that road was really well maintained. But you can see how that gets to be very inconvenient for people if that company's not very effective, or if people don't have the money, they're not going to get to drive on that road. Same with the military. Imagine you were only protected. You only had national security if you could pay for it. Or you only had police protection if you paid the police your monthly dues that month. It would be quite a different world. So our society has decided, no, let's all pay taxes, and then the taxes will pay for these things that we think everyone should have. We don't want people to choose whether or not they're paying the police bill this month. We're just going to have them do it. Another great example and a good argument for why some things should be done by the government is, imagine your house, you had to pay to have the fire department protect your house. Let's say the fire department was private and it was a company. It's called Fire Hoses for You. And you pay $60 a month, and if your house catches on fire, well, they'll come and put it out. Now imagine you pay every month on time, it's great, but your neighbor doesn't. Your neighbor doesn't. All of a sudden, your neighborhood catches on fire. Your neighbor's house is on fire. They run out, and the wind starts to blow the fire over onto your house. Now the fire department comes. But wouldn't it have been better if the fire department had come to your neighbor's house and the fire never had a chance to spread to your house? So there are some things that are better to bind together for. Imagine roads. What if there were competing highway companies and they built 3 highways right next to each other, and therefore there were way too many highways and there was no nice land to live on beside the highway? But people only drive on 1 or 2, whichever one the price is lowest on that day. It's pretty wasteful to build all 3 of those. So there are some things that it kind of makes sense to have the government do. But there are always arguments about privatizing this and that. When they say the word privatize, it means make it belong to the people, not the government. When they say make it publicly owned, they are talking about government ownership. So that's kind of it for today. I want you to go back to this scenario now. A free market with grades is what we currently have. If you earn the grade, you get paid. What's your pay? It's your grade. Okay, it's your A. So you do A work, you get an A. But this is a communist scenario. The whole class will get the same grade. Okay, whatever the average is will be awarded to everyone. Let's look at your options. You could work really, really hard, but you run the risk that everybody else does nothing and you'll still get an F. You could work medium hard, and either everybody will work harder than you and you'll get an A, and that'll be great, or everyone will laze around and you'll all get Fs again. Or you could just laze around and hope that everybody else does a good job. But if they're the same as you won't have anything. If you would vote for this scenario, let us know in this week's discussion. If you think this scenario is a terrible idea, also let us know. But I also want you to consider, what if this was food? You only get the amount of food that everybody gathers. You'll all get an average. Imagine if everyone lazed around all day instead of getting food. You'd starve, right? So this is one of the problems. It's called with communism, and it's called equal pay for unequal work. Okay, equal pay for unequal work. So consider it. What do you think?